Hi, I'm Amy Shannon from Amy's
Good evening,
Bookshelf Reviews
listeners. I'm Amy
podcast,
Shannon, and
where
welcome
stories
to Amy's
speak,
Bookshelf
voices
Reviews
matter, and words
podcast.
come alive. If you
Conversations,
are
revelations, and
following
inspirations
this
behind a
on
book. You never
Spotify,
know where the conversation will lead us,
please
so let's find out.
follow the
Tonight we have a guest with
podcast.
us. Thank you for
Um,
joining us, and will you please introduce
Now,
yourself and
the
let people know how to
interviewees
connect with you?
uh,
Yeah,
have
so
the
my name is
option
Jacob
of
Sharp.
having an
I'm the
audio-only
author
podcast
of the
session or a
upcoming
video
book with
podcast
Raconteur Press,
session.
A Boy Against the
This
Boxers.
is a
Uh,
video
I live here
podcast
in
session,
Kentucky.
and
I've
I
been writing
hope
for a
that
couple of
you
years.
enjoy it.
And if you
It
want
will
to connect with
also
me, I've got
be
a Facebook
shown on
page.
YouTube.
I
So
believe I
if
sent you the
you
link. I
are
don't remember it off the
watching
top of my
this on
head, but
YouTube,
Facebook is my primary
please
use. It's
subscribe.
Jacob
Thank
Sharp
you.
Writes. I do have LinkedIn. I do have Instagram, but I don't check it as often. But Facebook is my primary contact.
No problem. I will put that information in the description of this episode when it goes live. So, how you said you've been writing for a little while. So when did you start writing?
Yeah, so I've always been. I think everyone who writes has always had some kind of interest in writing. So since I was a kid, I've sort of put stories together and things like that. But I never really took it seriously until so I joined the Army in 2010, and in
Thank you for your
2012.
service.
Oh, thank you. So from 2012 into 13, I was deployed to Afghanistan, and while I was there, I'd grown up reading all of these books, Vietnam memoirs and things like that from the soldiers' perspectives.
Yeah.
And I thought, hey, I should, I wasn't a diary guy or, I didn't journal or anything like that. But I thought, hey, I should do something with this. I should put some chapters together. And maybe I can write my own book someday. Or at least I can remember what happened, without
Right.
losing some of these memories. So, yeah, I wrote a couple of chapters. We got busy. It lived on a computer for several years and didn't do anything with it. And then I get out of the Army in 2016. I go to Western Kentucky University, and my minor was in history. One of the history courses I took was a military history course, and our final assignment was to do a battle analysis. So you had to pick a battle in history, analyze it, go through all these things we talked about. And I couldn't find any that I was particularly interested in. So I thought, well, what if I write about one I was in? So I went back to those documents and, used that. I interviewed some of my friends who were still in touch with me and sort of created my own primary source documents and went that way. And that sort of just spiraled into hey, I should finally finish this. I was finally in a headspace to do it. Ended up knocking that out, finishing it. Contracted it in 2023 or 2024. It's still sort of, it's a slower process with that publisher, but yeah, so that's what sort of kicked it off. And then from there, I thought, hey, I've written one book and contracted one book. That's a pretty good batting average. Maybe I can actually write some stuff. And so from there, it's sort of just been this journey of hey, let's. I was introduced to Raconteur Press through a friend who writes for a different publisher. It's all sort of, this circle of authors who write for the same couple of publishers. And I saw the short stories that they do, the anthologies. I thought that would be fun. Hey, let's see if I can write a noir detective story. Let's see if I can write a pirate story. Let's see if I can do this or that. So it's all been sort of experimentation to this point, but yeah, that's sort of how I got into actually writing for this sort of work. And yeah.
That's great. So did you get a good grade on that assignment?
It was pretty okay. Yeah. Probably B.
Well, great. That's wonderful. And yeah, I actually like how you said that you experiment with different, writing about different things. Some too many times authors they sit in their comfort zone and they don't challenge themselves to or switch. And then there's some that will just write whatever they can, or they'll try. I know an author who would she only wrote short stories, and then she tried to write a full-length novel, and she kept coming to me saying, "Oh, this is driving me nuts." I'm like, "You can do it." And she did do it, and it got published. But it was things like that change. I changed from the genres I was writing in, like suspense and private investigators and crime dramas, to nonfiction, historical, and children's books. So I can't wait to read. I have the book that you sent me, so I have that on my pile of things to read. But I really, so your story, is it one of those that are, I know they're gearing towards young boys to read. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Raconteur, and I'm not sure. I did go back and listen to some of your other episodes. I'm not sure if you've had anyone. I think I don't think they're out yet. Basically, for some of the other author interviews for the boys books, but yeah. So Raconteur, this was another thing, you know, with getting into seeing that they were doing short story anthologies and sort of writing those. I saw that they had an open call for boys adventure books, and you know, their whole mission with the boys adventure books is just, I mean, generally speaking, younger boys are an underserved market in writing.
Yeah, that's true.
I think the origin story for that, there are other people that know it better than me, but having heard them retell it on different podcasts, it's, I believe one of the editors there went to a Scholastic book fair with his sons and saw that, hey, we've got like 2 shelves for boys, you know, and everything else is
For
for
girls.
everyone else, you know,
Yeah.
like, and so they sort of took the bull by the horns with that category and have run with it. And so that's how I got turned on to it. You know, I saw that they had an open call. I'd never considered writing a boys book before, but I certainly grew up reading them. And one of the ones that the primary, I guess you could say, motivation or inspiration, I guess, for my book, A Boy Against the Boxers, was one called The Long Portage or The Long Portage by Herbert Best. And so this was this classic, like late 40s, early 50s style boys adventure book, historical fiction. You know, this kid is working through like the French and Indian War and meeting Rogers Rangers and doing all these different things. And I love that book growing up. I still try to read it every couple of years. And those just don't exist anymore. Like, people aren't writing, you know, these sort of, like, yeah, it's still serious context and serious subjects, but they're kind of carefree. You know, you don't need a love interest. You don't need a lot of cussing, any at all, really. You know, it's okay to have good role models, adults. Everybody doesn't have to be, you know, in the midst of some sort of tragedy. And that's sort of the direction that they've gone with that. And yeah, that was sort of some of the background to me writing and submitting this manuscript.
Yeah, I have interviewed a few authors that are writing those types of books, and they are scheduled to come out in a couple months. So that's how far I'm scheduling out. But yeah, I've talked to them, and I thought that this was just, I wish they had this when my kids were little, because I have boys. I mean,
Right.
now my youngest, they're 26 now, but you know, my son loved to read as a kid, and he loved just the books and adventures and stuff. But even the books that he read, they were more geared to girls, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, he didn't care. It was just like, you know, it was very hard to find books, you know, not the young adults where you know, fantasy you get can be dark and more violent, but there is that, you know, I would say between 7 and 10 or 11 age, where it is a lost market. And I'm glad now that for, you know, boys to read and even girls to read, just to that they have something. It expands their imagination. Maybe they want to go on their own quest, you know, in their backyard instead of being in front of a video game or a screen. So I really, once I found out that they were doing that, I was just very impressed, because I think you're right. It's whoever, you know, like the story you told me about that, I didn't realize that's what started it, but I completely understand. You know, when my kids came home, they always had those scholastic things that you fill out which books you want. And my sons and I would go through them. And then one time I picked out, because I had it as a kid, was the Little House books. And my son was so proud that he was ordering books for his mom. So he told like all of his classmates that he was ordering books for his mom. And I
Right.
still have that collection. I still go back and read it. But
Mhm.
even with that, it's still it's it's a young girl's story, but some things would be interesting to boys. I used to read it to them or write stories specific for them because they didn't have those, unless you're learning your ABCs or or reading Dr. Seuss. There's not a lot of books that are with that particular age group, and so I really commend that. Um, so the story that you put out, what inspired you besides the fact that they were you decided to try to write a boys adventure book, but what really inspired the boys adventure?
Yeah, so A Boy Against the Boxers, just the sort of brief synopsis is it follows a young American boy named Eddie Donahue, and he's the son of an American merchant who is working in the what was known as the International Legation Quarter in Peking, China, which is modern day Beijing. And this was in 1900, the late 1800s. The specific events happened in 1900. To make a very long, convoluted history short, the Chinese people at the time felt that there was all this foreign intrusion, foreigners being, Europeans, Americans, Japanese, even a lot of different nationalities who were working in these little enclaves for, their silk exports. Opium was a big industry at the time. You had all these different things that they were sort of extracting from the nation. You also had a lot of like missionary movements. So many Chinese were converting to Christianity. Of course, this was like the hand-in-hand thing with colonial movements at the time. They would always go, you would have the government aspect of a colonial incursion, and then you would also have the religious aspect where you'd have, Jesuits or whatever, prospective nationalities religion of choice was. And so you had this sort of nationalist Chinese movement that saw this, and in addition to some of the governmental things that were going on within the Queen King Qing dynasty at the time, they had this great fear that they were seeing their way of life go away. And I mean, they were correct for many parts. You had all this technology coming in and resources going out, and religions going away and changing. And so you had this nationalist movement known as the Boxers. They had a bunch of different names. I think like the Righteous Order, the Harmonious Fist, and all these crazy things. They would do these like magical martial arts demonstrations to show that they were invincible. And but ultimately, it was like a nationalist uprising movement that was anti-foreign and anti-Chinese Christian. And so this ultimately resulted in the Boxer Rebellion, the wider war in China at the time, wherein they tried to throw the foreigners out. And then the foreigners, in turn, you had this great last alliance of all these Western powers, including the Japanese, actually, who came and relieved Peking and saved this legation quarter. And so this was basically like the last time in history where you had all these Western powers fighting side by side 14 years prior to World War I, where, the tables totally turned. And now we've got antagonistic powers even up till now. Bolshevik Revolution follows this, all these other things. So this is a crazy piece of history, and a lot of people don't really know about it. The average person on the street, they know about World War I, they know about World War II, they know about all the boxes they check in school, but they don't often know about, I would hardly call the Boxer Rebellion a niche conflict. It was a fairly substantial conflict. But if you're not in a history circle, if you're just the average person, you've probably never heard of it. You've probably never heard of the International Legation, the Siege of Peking. There was a movie in the 1960s or 70s, 55 Days at Peking. It actually had Charlton Heston in it. But, I mean, not a lot of kids these days are watching Charlton Heston movies, So it's right. It's like this is sort of a forgotten part of the past. And so you've got this sort of fascinating story sitting here. But then to sort of come to how I found it, I think all young boys are sort of like issued at birth some sort of historical fact that they're interested in. Like 30% of them get the Roman Empire. Then you have like 20% that are into World War II. They kind of pull them out of a hat. Everybody gets one. Yeah, like you're into Vikings, you're into this. So I was in one of the lower percentages where I'm into like really niche conflicts, volunteer wars, you know, looking at both sides of, you know, trying to read narrative accounts of like the Spanish Civil War from both the nationalist and the socialist side, or, you know, things like the Boxer Rebellion, or the United States involvement in northern Russia in 1918 to 1921, fighting the Bolsheviks alongside the White Russians. Like, you've got all these crazy little pieces of history that just don't get a lot of exposure. We've seen some of them happen in our lifetime. Iraq, once we sort of pulled out, you had the whole Mosul thing where ISIS came up in 2015 and 2016.
Right.
There were a lot of volunteers from the U.S. and other places fighting in that. That was a really niche conflict. It's going to be another one of those things we're here in 30 or 40 years. That's sort of a forgotten piece of history. And so, yeah, I saw that they had this open call. This was a topic that I had read a really good book on. It was this sort of turn of the century thing that I had fresh in my mind. And I thought, hey, this would be really cool to find this sort of like, I'm not going to call it an innocent period of time because it certainly wasn't, but, you know, this sort of pre-World War I era conflict where everybody was sort of, you know, obviously the Chinese weren't, but everybody was sort of on the same side in the West, sort of, you know, sort of, at least for this one event. And that's kind of fascinating. It's almost like watching The Mummy or like Young Indiana Jones. You know, you have this sort of time period in history that's very unique and interesting, and it's fun to see visually. And I wanted to see that on a page and see if I could make that work as sort of this like throwback almost boys adventure book. And in doing so, maybe introduce kids to a piece of history that they didn't even know existed.
And also maybe introduce their parents to it as well.
Right.
One of the things I do have a segment about, I call it story time for all ages, because I believe that all adults should read children's books and remind them, for one, what it was like. What is it like to be a kid? I mean, we are, well, I'm old, so, but when my kids were little, it wasn't about screens. They were running around making forts in the woods and, you know, wearing towels as capes, you know, to be superheroes. Right. And that's where they wanted to play. And then, but as they got older, you know, the technology, they were more, oh, I got to have a computer. I got to have this game system. But I still made sure that they had their time outside. But I also believe that if adults read children's books, you know, they might get a new perspective, or they're learning something new. And also, if they have trouble reading, they might be able to improve their reading or learn how to read.
Right.
I believe that everyone should know how to read. Because I think that people who don't know how to read or have trouble reading, they miss out on these magnificent journeys that are in these books, whether they're fiction or nonfiction. They just miss out on something where, you know, that moment where they're like, oh, I'm bored, I don't know what to do. I mean, when I was a kid and I told my mother I was bored, she'd go read a book. That was her thing, you know, and I did. And she did it for all of us, you know. Don't say you're bored when you've got all these toys, you've got all these books, and, you know, you have a backyard with a swing set. You should not be bored. So,
yeah, and I grew up much the same way. And I think we're in sort of an interesting period where, you know, we've got kids have all this access to technology, and, you know, theoretically, yeah, you've got a supercomputer in your pocket. You have all the knowledge in the world at your fingertips, but the way that the user interfaces on a lot of these machines work is they're so dumbed down and simplified that I've heard it referred to as being in a gated garden and thinking that you know what the woods are like. You know, sure, it's so you've got access to some of these things, but they're also holding your hand the entire time, and you're not necessarily going to be exposed to a lot of these topics or stories or whatever unless you're actively looking for them. And how do you even know to look for them if you don't know they exist in the first place? It's not like, you know, the early 2000s where you could type in a search phrase in a search engine and you've got every single response that you would ever get. You know, these are prioritized responses based on how much money people are paying to position their ads in a certain place, and everything past that is just gone. There's even websites you can't find unless you actively type them into the search bar with the exact, HTTPS or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of my outlook on I think I have the lucky title of being the first historical fiction boys book that Raconteur has ever published. So my whole thing with that is like, yeah, man, I mean, these kids, history's always been construed as sort of like, even when I was going to school, I'm sure it's no change now, especially with the, advent of all the technology that kids have access to. But history was always a dry subject. People tend to be bored by it and they don't really like it. A lot of kids get turned off. Yeah, I loved it too. I was the same way, but I know I felt like I was in the minority a lot of the time.
That's true.
And so I think what a lot of kids, you almost have to trick them into realizing that, like, oh, this is actually pretty cool stuff. And I think that's the real benefit of the sort of boys adventure market here is you can sort of sneakily trick them into thinking like, oh, this is actually a really cool, fun story. And then they get to the end of the book and they realize, oh, wow, this all actually happened, or most of, 80-90% of it anyway.
Exactly. Like, oh, I actually learned something. And if you can write a book in a way that kids don't think that it's just educational or whatever, it's having them realize it themselves. I remember when I homeschooled my twins when they were in high school. One special needs and the other one just wasn't getting the attention he needed. So we live in upstate New York, and we did a section on, the American Revolution, because it's a big thing around here. So then then when I brought them to the battlefield, they would read like those signs and go in and they're like, oh, I know who that is. I remember talking. And that was when I realized, and they did, that they actually did learn something, and it's something they took with them. And then we, from that, we found, we didn't even realize we had a military museum. So we went to see that one, and the same kind of thing. They're like, oh, I remember talking about this. And it was just to see them get it, realize that they knew something and they didn't have to Google it. They didn't have to look it up on YouTube. And nothing wrong with any of that stuff, but it's something they already knew, because when I taught them, I had them reading it in books. We'd go to the library and they would pick out books for it. And I think that's not looking it up on your Kindle or on your computer, just reading it in a book. And I think that is something that more kids should do.
Yeah, and then they get to go to a place like that in person, and they're standing there, and they have this realization that, like, oh, this happened here, and like I'm here. And it's that extra level of connection that comes from, obviously, the Boxer Rebellion's sort of, you're probably not going to Beijing, and a lot of those places have been leveled anyway. But read a book about the Revolution, about the American Civil War, something like that happened in your backyard, and now you're at the place where the thing happened, reading the sign. And you go, oh wow, like this was right here, and I'm here, and they were here, they were right there. Like it's I nerd out over that all the time, and knowing that could be transferred potentially, obviously maybe not this story, but stories in the future that I'm working on, and I'm sure other authors are working on. That really excites me, because it's like, okay, now we can shift this to, not only are we getting you into reading and we're sort of hooking you on reading, and addressing this sort of gap in the market, but we're, potentially increasing education levels. Generally, we're getting kids interested in things, and we're connecting them more to their physical location in some cases that they may not have even ever realized. How many times have you driven by a historical marker and never stopped and read it, and then when you do, you realize it was a significant event, and that's right next to your house or something. And so that's something that really motivates me to sort of be in this space. And I didn't think I was going to enjoy writing the boys' books as much as I did until I wrote the first one. And now that it's coming out, it's like, okay, this is really fun. It's a different kind of writing. It's sort of weird because you're not dumbing it down. That's not what you want to do, because kids aren't dumb,
No,
but it's
smarter than
definitely
a lot of adults.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely a different way of writing where you have to consider like, okay, do I need to spend this much time on this section, or do I need to like, what do I need to explain? What do I not need to explain? It's just different. You have to approach it from like a different perspective and try to figure out like what's the best way to get the kid to read this and enjoy it, and then try to get them to come back for the next thing. So it's definitely an interesting field as far as the books go. It's an interesting genre, and it's definitely cool to feel like it's obviously this was a huge market in the past, but it hasn't been for 30 or 40 years. So sort of feeling like you're on the forefront of that is also kind of cool. And I think, Raconteur's definitely done a really good job of taking advantage of that section of the market. So
I know that you're right about that. I mean, couple years ago, I wrote a paranormal book, and it was the first one I wrote where it took place in my hometown and I had to do a lot of research. So it inspired me to write a nonfiction book about how our town was created, and that included the wars and soldiers and people that were prominent. And then I just wrote another one that focused on people that some people might not never heard of. I'd go to cemeteries, and I would, record like a cemetery tour, but I would write down names or take pictures of stones, and then I would go and look them up to see if I could find out what kind of people they were. And if I could find that information, I put it in my book. It's coming out in April. But what I like to do is when I find that information, I share it with my sons. And sometimes I'm in a wheelchair sometimes, and I don't drive. So I have my one son who loves history, especially he likes like the tanks and the airplanes and all the different bombers and stuff like that. He's very into various military history, and he doesn't mind shoveling around to cemeteries, and he'd go and take pictures. But then I'd be like, I know that one, and then so he was learning too.
right.
I'm like, these are my friends. I know them because I wrote about them or I'm learning about them. So it's just exciting when I share it with my sons, and they listen. So and then they realize that, oh, so there is like you said, there's a lot of those landmark markers, the historical landmark markers, and there are a few that are incorrect around us, and then I point those out. But it's they don't, if you're driving, you barely even see it. You really have to take the time to, oh, there's a sign, let's just kind of slow down or pull over and see what it says. And why is this important enough to have a sign? So I think that something like what that Rankator Press is doing is just, it's amazing, because boys need to be able to read, and they can go on journeys, and it doesn't matter what they are into, cars or dinosaurs or space, military, and and wars, and why we have them, and why what happens within that. I think that's important for any person to know, whether they are a history buff or not. It's like if you are talking to somebody and they're not a history buff, they're like, yeah, whatever, I don't care.
Right. Yeah.
I reconnected with my dad's cousin, who, well, he's my second cousin, but he was a journalist, and he's a local county historian. And we reconnected after my grandmother passed, and he was just so excited because he couldn't find anyone else in the family that was interested in all his stuff. So he passed me a lot of information on family history, and plus just information about local history and stuff like that. And I'm like, you are like the smartest man I know. My dad was he was very intelligent. He was a genius, and he's got end stage dementia, so now he doesn't even know what food is. But he was the smartest man I ever knew. But he told me once that I was the smartest person he ever knew, because I always wanted to learn more, and I got that from my dad. If he didn't know something, he would read up on it, literally go to the library or buy an actual book, and he had a catalog that he could order books through. And because he did not use a computer, he didn't do anything. He did order directly from catalogs.
Right.
And it was just, and if when I was homeschooling my kids, if they did they were working on a project, and they're like, "Oh, we have to go talk to Grandpa because he'll know this stuff." So we would go over to my dad's house, and my dad would talk to him, and he just loved that the kids would, the boys would go over, and they would have conversations, not just like, "Oh, hi, Grandpa, how are you?" and then run off and go play. They had intelligent conversations, and my dad was always asking them what they were interested in. So if he wasn't familiar with the subject, he could be, so he could have conversations, with kids. And I think that is something that's really important. You pass on your story to your children or your next generation, or hopefully you have a next generation, and give them the ability, or the quest, I should say, to keep learning, learn something new every day. That's what I try to do.
Right.
And I think that is really important for boys too, especially boys. Girls, they've got imagination, and I'm not being like gender biased. I know that when growing up, it was like I was considered a tomboy because I liked to run around and play tag, and not necessarily play with dolls. I played with cars and GI Joe, and Barbie dated GI Joe for a while, but then they broke up. But it's the imagination, and these books. Oh, I am so excited for any child that's going to read your books. I can't wait to read it, but I'm very excited for you and for the rest of the adventures. I think that, they found something that, like you said, was gone a long time ago,
Right.
And so I'm very impressed, and I can't, and once I read the book and write my review, I will send you a note and let you know when it's been posted.
Perfect.
And and if you write any more, or you want to come back, and I have a historical segment, which I do because obviously I love history, but I also invite authors of nonfiction and fiction, historical fiction authors, to talk, or even my story time segment. So you are welcome at any time to come back. So I want to thank you for being on the show, and thank you, audience, for listening. If you wish to be a guest on the show, go to amysbookshelfreviews.com/podcast and schedule your pre-recording. Don't forget, if you wish to comment on this show or any show, comments are available, and yes, I will read them. Please follow this podcast on Spotify. I'm Amy Shannon. Be safe, be well, and always be kind. Thank you for watching this video podcast. Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast is a takeoff of Amy's Bookshelf Reviews website, and which does reviews and also author promotions. You can go to amysbookshelfreviews.com for more information. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe, follow, and keep listening. Thank you.